Hello, everybody. Happy July. We are, let us know if you're here. We are looking forward to having a different kind of Quilts First today.
Yeah,
we've got some ideas of things to talk about.
Something that's a little different.
Yeah, so let us know if you're here, and feel free to add questions as we go in the comment section in the live chat, and we'll get going. It looks like we've got a couple people here already.
Great.
So the first thing is we are in Michigan.
If you notice, this isn't our studio.
This is not our studio. Sounds you may hear, maybe toads. We have some very active toad croaking.
We have some active toads and several hundred tadpoles, which won't croak
I think
yet.
they'll be quiet. We're hoping Lucky. Hi, Kay. We're hoping Lucky will settle down with her chew stick.
Yes, she just had a big walk.
Yes. So, hi, Jackie. You're not too far away from us. We're in Sawyer right now.
Sawyer, Michigan.
So, but feel free to add questions as we go in the chat. I guess the first thing we should get going with was, do you want to talk about the label?
Oh, just a tiny
label?
detail for those of you who are doing shoreline. We posted a shoreline label at the beach house. So there's a button that, with all the installments and videos, it leads you right to a printable PDF.
So,
and a little detail, it's in blue, but if you want it to be black and white, just use black and white settings when you print it to fabric label.
So that's an easy way to go. And I just wanted to say, I feel like everybody had success with Shoreline. We haven't gotten any emails from anybody struggling.
Yeah, I think the advice and help that everyone gave and the encouragement, people seem to have really
good instructions.
Well, that's both of us.
Yes.
But I think there was a good level of confidence going in with the fabric selection and the palettes. And then the curves, which we agonized over getting them gentle enough, really
easy for you.
They did go together beautifully for people. I mean,
yeah,
quilt after quilt, when people are posting their flimsies, they're really lying flat.
Really nice.
So good job to all of you.
So well done with that. And someone asked if we could discuss some of the choices of things we use in our studio, like cutting mats. You know, I feel like when people ask me this, I feel like I'm really going to disappoint people because we have, Wendy's awake early in Australia. Oh no, I guess it's later in Australia now. Yeah, it's the Europeans that would be up in the middle of the night right now. I'm sure we have fewer tools than you do, and
I think people are often surprised who do visit our studio that we
only use the three rulers that we designed.
Yeah,
and we basically, the cutting mats. You want to talk about the cutting mats?
This isn't the main topic for tonight.
Yes,
we're going to get to that in a moment. This is just a little brief thing.
It was a question.
It was a question.
Yes,
that one thing I do want to point out: cutting mats are they're actually a sizable investment in two ways. They're big, and they're not inexpensive, especially because there's usually some sort of oversized shipping charge.
And we use two at a time.
Yeah.
Maybe you can explain
we have a long cutting table that's just a piece of birch plywood that we cut down. So it's about 3.5 feet by 8 feet, and it's up on wooden trestles. But we have 2.5 cutting mats basically taped together from the underside. And the one thing I wanted to mention when someone asked about studio supplies is, and I'm sorry we're not in our studio, so I can't hold it up, but when you look at cutting mats, over 50% of them are, in my opinion, terrible. There is a major brand that puts all of their measurement markers on the inside of the cutting area. So if you lay out a piece of fabric and line it up on the 0 line, you've covered up all the measurements. And I really dislike that mat. I accidentally bought them.
I know,
last time.
2 of them.
I was tired and I clicked on the wrong thing, and they're so expensive that I'm still going to use them up. But every time I put fabric down to cut it and I cover up those measurement numbers, I'm just annoyed with myself. And that is one of the number one things to look for to me when you buy a cutting mat, is make sure that all of those measurements are on the outside in basically the margin of the cutting mat.
On vertical and horizontal.
Yeah, and every time I use it, I think, who designed this? Clearly someone who doesn't sew.
Yeah.
And
it's
by a big
infuriating.
name company. So anyway.
But we will, at some point...
We'll talk more about this.
Yeah, we go through cutting mats really frequently, and so, this too shall pass for us. But anyway, Jackie says her curves are going together so well. She's going for a queen.
Oh, wow. That's great.
That's great.
I'm really interested in feedback for those of you who are doing queens on how you feel about, and you can give this feedback later when you get there, but breaking each row into 2 pieces. We really talked about multiple ways of doing it. And I know that it's like one additional mental step to have the rows kind of offset, but to me, I really wanted to avoid that center seam.
Yeah,
because
he was very worried about that.
When all the seams are staggered, and if you had a center seam, you would see it. It would just...
I don't think you'd see it, but he felt strongly about it.
I thought you would see it, so...
So Sabrina's asking about the motif on your shirt.
Oh, I actually have no idea what this motif is.
Yeah.
It's not a fabric we designed. No. I just liked it.
And it's blue.
It's
blue is the way to go for it.
Kind of blue and gray.
Yeah.
And when I got the shirt, I looked at it trying to think, like, is it something? Is it fish hooks? No, I have no idea. It's just a cool pattern, but thank you.
Okay, so let us know if there are other topics other questions you have, but if not, we came up with a topic that we thought, it looks like a cartoon bear. No,
oh, interesting.
No. We came up with a topic that we haven't talked about before, and that we thought might be helpful because there were so many people who used photos as inspiration for their shoreline palettes. And so we thought what we would do would be to talk about some hints for how to use a photo for as inspiration for a quilt.
So this isn't just about shoreline.
Yeah, this is just
we were thinking
general.
About it because so many of you did post wonderful photos that were inspiration, and it comes up in different ways with different quilt designs. But as we talked about it, we thought, this is definitely one of those.
It's a class, basically.
Yeah, it's like
we're
going to do a little class right now.
But
so and as such, if there's something that's not clear or you have a question about, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll try to address it.
But I think that this is, we can walk you through a series of questions that we would be asking ourselves if we were going to use a photo as inspiration for a quilt. Both, when I say inspiration for the quilt, both the palette you choose as well as the pattern, if you were gonna, like, how to translate that into a quilt. So I think the first thing that we would ask ourselves is, or that we would ask you if we were in a class with you, is what does the photo signify to you? And what are you trying to capture in the quilt?
It's a big This is actually a huge question because often people do bring us photos and say...
Very frequent.
And the thing is, it's often not the photo that's the inspiration, but it's the experience that was captured. It was the time, it was the place. And so whenever you have a photo that's an inspiration, to me, the first question is, what does it represent?
Right. And what are you trying to capture in the quilt itself? Are you trying to capture a palette or a mood or a shape or a motif or something like that? but the palette is usually the starting point. And one of the reasons this becomes so problematic is that there's software out there that where I know, because people have done this in class, and I've just kind of like, where they've said, oh, I got this app that takes my photo and translates and directs all of the colors in the photo to Kona solids.
And what it often does is it analyzes the photo and picks the 3, 5, 7, whatever predominant colors. It basically is analyzing the whole thing and saying, what is there the most of? And this is your palette.
And these are the numbers you should buy to get that exact color. And so the challenge with this is that, first of all, the colors can be really different depending on the time of day that you've photographed. So in general, if you want to capture someplace at its best and you want it to look the best, early morning or like an hour before sunset are typically the times that the light is the best and the warmest. And
but it will be a very warm, it'll
be
warm
soft.
Up all the colors.
And if you take the photo in the middle of the day, it's going to be super washed out. If it's a cloudy day, you're going to get more true colors.
Yeah.
But if it's, all blue skies, you may get some harsh shadows. You may get some washed out colors. Sometimes I feel like the camera compensates and things get too bright. Yeah. Some colors get too bright.
And a lot of people, most people are taking photos with their phones now. And often they do oversaturate colors.
Right. And that wasn't the actual color of the sailboat in the harbor or whatever.
Right. It can be a beautiful photo, but it may not be where you were or how you experienced it. So it's a little bit of a mind game. Is what you have to ask yourself, what is it that's inspiring you? Is it the photo, which is a representation of the time and the place, or is it the actual time and place? Did the photo capture your experience accurately, and does that even matter?
And if you wanted to do it based on the Eiffel Tower or something like that, well, the Eiffel Tower looks really good, really different at 8 a.m. than it does at 1 p.m. than it does at 10 p.m.
And it looks very different up close and far away when it's just silhouetted against the sky.
So one of the things that we suggest you do is if you are, when you're taking the photo, if you can pause for a moment and try to etch the colors and everything in your mind, and or use the edit settings on your phone to make sure that the colors that you're seeing on your camera are actually the colors that you're trying to capture in the photo, because sometimes they're really different, and it's hard. It's hard to take that pause and just say, like, okay, do I need to adjust the exposure here?
And I think it's especially hard with a phone, because it's so easy to take pictures. For those of you who experience the world in film, every shot costs you money, so you took time. And you are often a little more intentional. And with a camera in your pocket with your phone, you can just take picture without reflecting as much.
It's hilarious that you pointed to your pocket, because there's not a woman in the world who keeps her camera in her pocket. But anyway, we understand. So if at all possible, before you take the photo that you're going to use for the inspiration, it might be the case that you don't think about it until after the fact.
Right, that happens a lot.
If it's possible, if you're thinking, this is a really great vacation, and I want to, get this picture of my granddaughter, swimming at the beach or something.
Or my garden is looking the finest it's looked in years, and I want to get this vignette.
If you can just take a moment and try to capture what it is it peaceful? Is it exciting? Is it nostalgic? Is it like, what is it that is going to be the inspiration for your quilt? For example, the quilt behind us is Picnic. We designed it many years ago using two fabric lines that we had designed together. There's prints and yarn dyes together, and there's a lot of plaids in it, and that had a very kind of vintage
summer picnic.
Yeah, picnic vibe to us. There's no picnic basket, there's no picnic food, there's not even any red and white, gingham napkins or whatever, but it's the overall feel of, I mean, this isn't a palette that you would associate with going skiing, for example, or a ballet class, or something that it has a very kind of specific, and at least
to me too.
Yeah,
I think also these fabrics are none of them are highly saturated. So it's not that they look weathered, but they have, when Week says vintage, they don't feel like they're brand new just out of the box. They feel like old friends that, to me, is that kind of picnic basket, napkin, tablecloth experience. And even kind of worn shorts or shirt or whatever. And so, going back to if we were inspired by, if we were on a picnic and we took a picture of it, it's not just the colors, it's the feel. Or the shape of the picnic basket or whatever. So, one of the things that I'd also ask you about your photo is there one special element that caught your attention or that you want to focus on? Because as you think about how that translates to a palette, that might inform the choices you make for the proportion of colors you use. So if the sailboat in the harbor had a little red flag flying on it, so maybe there's a little tiny bit of a small proportion of red. It doesn't necessarily mean all red, but that might inform your palette. I think this is one of the next major things to be cautious with if you use any of those apps that either suggest a fabric palette or just pull a palette from a photo. As we said earlier, they tend to focus on the major proportion, the colors that are there's the most of. And they give you everything in the same proportion. They'll give you 5 squares or 7 squares of color, and that's not what made the photo striking. Most likely, it was probably the little bits that we often talk about it in terms of food. That if we wanted to make you lasagna, you would not want a lasagna that was equal parts garlic, ricotta, tomato sauce, noodles. You want the parsley to be a garnish and not an equal amount with the noodles. Exactly. So it would really be helpful if somebody, a few of you could. Is this helpful? Is this useful? Because we have there's a bunch of this of ideas that we've kind of thought about to share with you. But I want to make sure that we're not off in the weeds. So let us know in the comment section whether this is helpful or useful to you. But we saw so many people were posting photos, so we thought we would talk a little bit more about them. The other thing that I would ask is did you edit the photo in any way? Because, yes, this is helpful. Okay, I'll tell one person. That's all I need. Okay, Catherine, we'll keep going. So, and if, let's say you're looking at the photo now, and it was a photo you took 6 months ago, is it worth trying, before you start looking at colors for your palette, do you want to maybe edit it now and play with it and see, do you need to sharpen some of those colors? Do you need more contrast? Do you need less contrast? Do you want to have fewer colors? I mean... Yeah, and this goes back to one of the big thoughts behind this, which is the photo already exists. You're not trying to recreate
Right.
the photo. You're trying to create a quilt. And a quilt isn't a photo. And so you're going to make compromises, you'll make adjustments. And so it's not like you're contractually obligated to make this photo as it was.
No.
It's
a tool
it's
for
a
you.
tool. And
Yeah.
I actually think photos are great.
I love it when you get in the weeds. So one of the things that I would say is I would play around with the photo before you start thinking about a palette, because you might find that making some adjustments to either the exposure or the intensity, or there's a whole bunch of different, depending on what photo app, what app you use to edit your photos, you might find that the photo looks more like the place.
Or more like your memory or your experience. And,
exactly.
Or
do you want to soften those colors, or do you want them to be sharper? Do you want all those shadows? Do you want fewer shadows? I mean, all of that is what Twyla Tharp refers to as chicken scratching. It's where you get ideas, and it's how you edit your idea before you jump into the quilt itself. You're trying to kind of add some volume and some body to this initial idea. And one of the ways you can do that is to examine the photo and play around with it, because that might help you then start choosing colors.
Yeah. And so this is just like the first thing, the fact, or the looking at the photo as a source of color inspiration. And then one of the things that can be tricky is photos capture a realistic world. It's recognizable, whether it's a picture of an old sofa or of the beach. It is representational, and sometimes what you have to do is say, I'm not interested in what it represents, I'm only interested in the color. Or do you want the color and the figurative representation?
Catherine's got it exactly. I need to dig deeper to figure out what the photo sparks in me. Yes. Absolutely.
Because I think if you just look at the photo and try to recreate it, it can still make for a beautiful quilt, but it won't necessarily go as deep or become as meaningful.
Yeah, and I think since Wendy Brown is here, I'm pretty sure, I'm going to be embarrassed if I've gotten this wrong, but I think Wendy Brown was the one who had the photo of the Australian shoreline with the road encroaching on it, and then we went back and forth about like, should it be
the
straight?
Placement and
it was kind of like, there's only so many things you can type in a comment section, but actually I think even if it wasn't Wendy, I think many of you remember that beautiful photo of the Australian shoreline. But looking at that photo, what she said when we commented back and forth was that the encroachment of that straight road was an important design element for her. And so, that also informs the color that road is.
The proportion, the placement.
Exactly. How wide? I mean, maybe it was just a little thin strand in the photo, but
its significance may have been much greater.
Exactly. And maybe that deserves a larger, scale within the design, because it's larger in importance to your idea.
And it may be the reason you took that specific photo. And so, when the photo is an experience and you want not necessarily, sometimes you just want to convey your experience in the quilt. Other times you want the viewer to share some aspect of that experience. And so exaggeration, emphasis.
Yeah, it's exactly
Those
what
are
Jackie just
all
said.
really,
Yeah.
really important tools. Oh, okay,
Exaggerating
Jackie.
an area is enough to bring more focus to the project. Exactly.
It is. And one of the challenges is like finding that sweet spot, because too much exaggeration, it can make something comic instead of serious. I mean, it's such a you know, there's not a 1+1 = 2. There's not a right answer. You just have to kind of find and finesse those elements.
So, in the we have a code for this that I've never talked about before, but I'll tell you about this because it was so long ago, and this was 10,000 students ago. I was teaching someplace, and this was a kind of design. It was an idea to quilt class, and
that was specifically about helping people take an idea and make a quilt from it over a 1 week period.
You're right. And one woman had been on a banana boat with her friends, and everybody had fallen off the banana boat, and it became like this big family lore moment where everybody had these wonderful memories of the banana boat. And so the woman had brought to this class this fabric with bananas on it. And she wanted to use that as the main fabric. And I had a hard time trying to explain to her that it wasn't about the bananas. It was,
right. That was a distraction.
Well, and
that fabric,
it was a distraction, and it wasn't about the banana boat. It was about the fun they had, and maybe you could include a banana yellow fabric in it, but the banana
when you get so literal,
then it's kind of too lost. So one of the things.
So the code word is banana boat.
So banana boat is shorthand for us for somebody who's rushing to represent an idea without really thinking through what the actual idea is.
Yeah.
That it wasn't about the bananas, it was about the family, and so there are lots of different ways you could represent that, but you don't have to be literal. And she wanted to have banana shapes, and and it was just then it becomes kind of like a cartoon.
It does. And Wendy, thanks for replying, because I think it was so evident to us that you were thinking so much more deeply about that experience in that place, and it was wonderful to see how you pursued that.
Right.
And again, as quilters and for the group, I think you explained your experience well. And so I think everyone, it's kind of fun. You live vicariously. Like, what's the solution going to be? Because there are so many ways of expressing what you want to express. But when you did it, I think there was kind of a collective aha.
Well, or what I couldn't figure out was, does the road need to be, was the curve the right thing for it? Or should they all be straight? I mean, there were like 10 quilts you could have made from that photo.
And actually, I'm laughing because this is something that we see very often also, that someone has a photo that's so rich with meaning and they want to fit that all into one quilt, but it's actually 3 quilts or it's 4 quilts.
I don't think hers was 4 quilts.
No. I'm not talking about Wendy's, but I'm saying that sometimes the color palette alone, abstracted, could be a wonderful quilt separated from the plate.
I couldn't see the road in the photo.
Right.
But she knew it was there.
Because it was about the experience and not the photo.
Exactly. So a lot of this is exactly what Claire's saying right here. Trying to figure out how to signify a feeling or an event. That's why I said at the beginning, what are you trying to capture? Mm-hmm. Are you trying to capture the family in the water, off the banana boat, in which case there's just a little bit of, there's maybe a lot of blue, and there's some like swimsuit colors, and then there's maybe some yellow, but it doesn't need to be a banana fabric.
Exactly.
And so, and the thing is that you can, and I see this all the time in like one of the big quilting groups that I'm part of, that somebody will say, show me your firefighter quilts, show me your Harry Potter quilts, show me your ballerina quilts. And then everybody is, will say, oh, so-and-so has an on-point ballet shoe applique quilt. And that is a legitimate way to do it as well. But the other option is to think about the colors you associate with the ballerina. And, it could be a broken dishes quilt for all that matters.
We actually, when we were new to quilting and we're doing a lot of color exploration, I think broken dishes was one of my absolute favorite patterns, because
it still is one of mine.
It still is, because it's a square cut in half, and it lets you, especially with solids, work with composition, with proportion. I think broken dishes is fascinating because you'll have two triangles that have the long edge that's shared. So there are places where 2 fabrics touch, and then there are places where 4 fabrics touch, and then there are the points where 8 fabrics touch.
But that
so
sharpness.
You get different sharpness and sparkle, and there's a lot of kind of push and pull. And so I think if a color palette really fascinates you and you want to explore the color work without being literal or figurative, broken dishes, I think, is hard to beat.
Yeah.
It's just
because
put
you
the
can
colors
scale,
out.
but you can also change the scale.
They can be tiny
of the
squares,
dishes, the big dishes, little dishes, and in columns or rows. There's so much richness with that one little simple block that I feel like is a little more sparkly than just a 9-patch or something.
Well, the thing is, squares, it's always 2 fabrics next to each other or 4 next to each other. And it's the points of the 2, 4, or 8 in broken dishes that really makes it a different pattern.
I have to point out Catherine's comment that she's she's finding this conversation so liberating, because she's beginning a memorial quilt for her husband, or for her father. And I now feel freed not to be literal about representing specific memories in that quilt.
Oh,
exactly.
Wonderful.
I'm so glad the timing is helpful for you with this, because doing memorial quilts is so, at least I have found it overwhelming. And I won't go into all the gory details, but my best friend in high school was killed by a drunk driver, and I made memorial quilt for his widow and their children.
One for every
4 of them. Yeah. Yes, there were 4 of them total. And, it's such a heavy experience. So to not feel overwhelmed by the design decisions, if you can if you can get pretty ironclad in your decisions, your design decisions before you start, because just the cutting alone is hard. I just cried and cried making those memorial quilts. So I think the quilting world in general, and most quilting teachers, focus on techniques, and they don't focus on design and color and meaning in a quilt,
and just
to give it the richness it could have.
And part of it is the process. And again, I think I want to just make a quick aside with memorial quilts, because it can feel like a lot of pressure. But remember, it's not just about the quilt, it's about the process of making it.
Exactly.
That is imbuing it with all that meaning and extending it. So, yeah.
Yeah. But the other thing that you can do, I mean, and this is especially for memorial quilts, is that I'm a fan of the simpler the better. If you're making it from, like I used my friend had a massive, he was an Iraqi war veteran, he was a flight instructor for the Navy, but he and I, when we were teenagers, went to a lot of rock concerts, and he had a huge collection of rock concert t-shirts. And so rather than, piecing up a storm, I just kind of I cut the rock t-shirts in appropriate proportions and had them be the focus of the quilt. I feel like memorial quilts are really about, I think some people feel like it's not an honor, they're not honoring the person if the piecing isn't super complicated and the quilting isn't super ornate. But I feel like, especially if you're using clothing or something like that, that the simpler the better, because then you're not distracting from those fabrics that are so, at least I felt like it was sacred.
And I'd actually go to kind of in the way that if you're working with a photo, the quilt isn't the photo. With a memorial quilt, there's no way you're going to capture everything you feel. You can't do it. Don't put that pressure on yourself. So whatever you make is the expression. And I think that keeping that in mind, that there is a parallel to the photo, that you're not trying to recreate a life. You're not.
Exactly.
And
but you're trying to get to the essence.
You're capturing, and you're not going to capture everything, but you'll capture some part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Elizabeth, you're right that most quilting teachers don't have art training, so they focus on technique. But it becomes like a chicken and egg thing too, that I think that if our goal is to always help quilters grow and to help you feel more confident in taking on and in just broadening your skill set, because then you can broaden the types of quilts you make and it becomes a little bit more interesting. But I think then, because it's not taught, then people don't know that they're missing it. And then, like when we're doing a quilt along or something like that, I feel like, we didn't know so many people were going to be working from photos. And then there was this kind of like, well, if I had known they were going to do that,
we could have talked about this.
We could have talked about design from photos, but this is like still.
But it's actually one of the things I like about the two-way kind of conversation that happens with Facebook is we wouldn't have thought to do this if we hadn't seen all of your
You inspired us.
And so I do.
Because we were just sitting here on vacation.
Yeah, we're on vacation right now.
We're on vacation for like 3 days.
Yes. But I think about photos so often, and that they're a great jumping off point.
Yeah. So one of the other things I'll mention about photos is a watercoloring teacher of mine in graduate school told us that whenever possible, we should try to paint from real life, not from a photo, because the way that the camera cannot see depth and shapes and shadows with the same complexity that the human eye can.
Right. I mean, we have binocular vision, and the camera is a single lens, so it flattens everything.
Right. So that's another reason to, when you're taking the photo, if you feel like it's a special moment you're trying to capture, if you can just take a minute, if you have the presence of mind to think of a word or think of I have this memory that I've referred to so many times of my grandmother in 1968. She was a widow, and she remarried, and she was, I guess she must have been like my age now. Mm-hmm. And she was suddenly a newlywed in her early 60s. And that summer, she came, we were all, our family was all at the beach, and she came to the beach and she had this beautiful aqua and gold and olive and teal swimsuit on. And it's like imprinted in my brain. I was like 7 years old, and it was imprinted in my brain that like that was kind of, that's the beach color to me, you know, is just remembering that swimsuit color. So anyway, back to technique for a second. I like the way Wendy put the scar in the road in solids and matched the green verticals. Yes, exactly.
There are a lot of decisions in that gesture.
There really were. There really were.
And
so shapes look different in photos. Colors look different in photos.
And you don't have to be literal. I think that's one thing over and over. And okay, since someone said they don't mind us getting in the weeds, this is just going to be like 2 minutes because we both have different.
I have no idea where he's going on this.
But it makes me think, I teach, among other things, logo design as a graphic design professor. And one of the great phrases that Sean Adams, a wonderful graphic designer, said with logo design is identify, don't explain.
Oh,
That so many people think, oh, I'm doing a logo for the local plumber, so I have to have a plumber's wrench and I have to have... And if you think about a lot of the logos that you're surrounded with, whether it's the Apple logo or the Nike logo, if you look at an Apple, no one is thinking computing. If you look at the Nike swoosh, no one thinks, I mean, it is a mark that identifies and it through time signifies something.
It tells a story though.
It's all part of a story, but it's not literal in any way.
Yeah. And actually, Pat, I would say that Wendy's scar with the solids, I would say that's a design decision.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's so. But one of the other things I wanted to talk about was the proportion. You want to talk about proportion and how you take the photo and how you think about the proportion? We talked about it a little bit, but you can expand on it.
Again, proportion is so important, and I think in one example we use a lot is if you go into a frame shop, you might see an example of a framed photo of a newborn with these bright blue eyes, and they maybe have put a blue mat around the whole photo to bring out the blue, but in fact it overwhelms it. Like often that tiny bit of blue in the case of a baby with bright blue eyes is what stands out because it's different. It's in a small proportion, and then if you overextend that, you lose its power. So restraint in color is really important often.
So we had some photos in this book. One of my favorite garden designers is a guy named Dutch man named Piet Oudolf, and this is a book of one of his garden design. And I want you to look at this photo right here. And this is a plant called sea holly, and this is a white variation or white.
Silvery white.
Yes, this is silvery white. I'm trying to remember the common name for this, but anyway, if you were going to take this photo, minus the Post-it note,
the yellow Post-it note.
If this photo was the inspiration for your quilt, and you put it into one of those apps or whatever, you'd find that that silvery white is a small part of it, and that there's a lot of purples over here and a lot of pinks and then some golds in the back.
Deep greens.
Yeah, but these parts right here where the seeds are and the seed heads of the sea holly, they're not white really. They're sort of light green. But how you handle if this, you wouldn't necessarily want to follow the proportions of this photo for your quilt. You might decide to make it predominantly this white, silvery white. And you might look at light gray as opposed to white.
But then you also have to make this big leap, because what is your quilt? If it's a block that has fine sashing, maybe that silvery white is the sashing because that is less in proportion. But your quilt, I mean, unless you're doing a literal interpretation of the photo, your quilt is going to have different shapes and sizes. Everything's going to be different.
But you can imagine taking this palette and putting that in a broken dishes, because these sharp petal forms here could be really fantastic represented in a broken dishes triangle, for example.
Yeah.
But again, it's about the proportion, and the proportion as it appears in the photo isn't the proportion that you need to use in your quilt.
And it's not necessarily the proportion you remember even.
But I would identify the important colors in the photo and think carefully about their proportion, because this is a photo, it's not a quilt. But if you decided, for example, that you were just going to look at this part, then the white becomes this really small, precious proportion compared to the other colors in the quilt, and then that's a totally different quilt than using the entire thing.
And it's
so
also
play
different
around with proportion of the colors as well.
And it's also different because it's a photo of a garden. The garden, if you're actually experiencing it, has depth, and the photo doesn't. So the photo is literally a snapshot of a space, whereas your memory of it might be of the being surrounded by this, being immersed by it in the depths. So it's tricky.
So I was someplace where there was a translator translating, and there's often, for somebody who was speaking Japanese, and then the person that they were translating for actually understood what they were saying, but wanted somebody more eloquent to do the translation. So, but the comment they made has stuck with me, which is sometimes things are ruined by translating it, like from a photo to a quilt, and sometimes they're improved by the translation. And so when you're looking at the photo, remember that you might have just taken it on the spur of the moment, but you can crop it, you can adjust the color, you can change the proportion, and you can totally rethink what that photo means and then kind of improve it with that translation. The other thing is to not be afraid to just rely on the palette. You don't have to worry about capturing the shapes, or that the shapes and the motifs don't necessarily have to literally mean anything. It can just be colors, because colors have strong associations.
And that goes back to that reference earlier to memorial quilts, where sometimes it's just the color that's the feel. Sometimes it might be the complexity or the simplicity of the block or pattern that you're using that is evocative as well. But constraints can really be your friend. Not trying to tackle too many things.
Because if it's all about the colors, it's going to be so much more powerful in a simpler quilt than it would be in a block of the month quilt or whatever, where you've got all the distractions of all the different sample blocks or whatever. Just one bold gesture, and how you're going to take that color and translate it into one bold gesture. And I think that was what was so great about the photo that Wendy chose, is that was a really bold photo, and what she was trying to point out about man's encroachment into that natural environment was so perfectly captured in that photo. And you may not, on vacation, when your husband's saying, "Come on, get in the car," you might not have the time to make that perfectly composed photo, but you can do it later.
And your photo can be like a sketch.
Yeah. And so, is there anything else you want to add on this topic? Or?
I mean, we can go on forever. I just find it such a rich topic, and I think for both of us, we love exploring ideas, talking them to death sometimes, because by talking with someone else about what that photo means to you, what that experience means to you, can often help you find the seed that you're trying to nurture in your quilt.
Well, and there was one more photo from the Udolph book that I thought was really helpful. And it's a bunch of asters, predominantly asters, with these London plane trees. They're I'm pretty sure they're in Europe, so they're not the American sycamore trees, but it's the same family. But you can see how just the way that this photo was taken, those vertical elements could be really powerful in that as the highlight strips in
the shoreline.
In shoreline, for example, that those cues are where you're getting the shapes and the proportion of those trunks to the rest of the garden. That would be a really easy thing to translate into a quilt, but you've got to have the right photo to kind of even see it, because most people wouldn't cut off the tops of the trees like this.
No.
But the fact that they did, to focus on the asters down below, really kind of, it gives you a head start.
And also, we talked earlier about contrast. When you have those plane trees that are so light, and at this time of day, they're basically half dark, half light.
Yeah.
And the banding, the vertical banding becomes even stronger. I was biking back last week in Chicago. There's a trail called the 606, which is an elevated old railroad track that's now a linear park with you can bike and jog. And I was going down it to the bakery. And one of my favorite sections is where it's planted mostly with natives, then all of a sudden it goes through a section of river birches. And it's kind of almost jarring to go from this lush, low plantings and then some higher green to just columns.
Yeah.
And when you're biking, you can't look up. You have to look at the traffic. So you don't even notice the upper story of the trees.
Right.
It's
just like this.
It feels like that.
Exactly.
And I think that, again, if you're trying to capture that feeling in a quilt, it's not, I don't want pictures of trees. I'm not trying to duplicate trees. It's about
it's knowing what to edit. It's knowing what to edit. That's what it comes down to. Editing the palette, editing the motifs, editing the shapes. And, I'm glad, Pat, that you got the idea that, the color can really be, that can be the focus. You don't need to, it doesn't have to be representational. You can do a lot with the color. And even with the banana boat, it could be 10 shades of the yellow, but not the banana shape.
Yeah, and I'm not anti-figurative, anti-representational at all. There's some beautiful representational quilts. It's just that allowing yourself to only focus on color at times can be very, very freeing, and it could be one way.
It could be a lot easier to make, more satisfying in the end too.
Even if you have I'm going to say standard quilt pattern that you're following, thinking more deeply about the meaning of the color going into it can be a good step towards design.
So if you are one of these people who's looking for the firefighter quilt, think about the colors and the proportions of colors that you see in a fire station. Ask somebody if you've got a family member who's a firefighter and you're trying to make a quilt for that person, ask them to take a picture of like the most meaningful part of the fire station. And that is going to be so much more powerful than getting some panel print that says firefighters, or
And it also might be about, this goes back to proportion, that thinking of hearing stories from firefighter friends, that so much is about the proportion because the majority of their day is repetitive, mundane, and it's punctuated by this adrenaline rush,
sense of urgency,
and how that it may not be one photo, it may be photos over a day or over a week that you're trying to get that whole experience into and capture. Sometimes that color can capture a sense of time.
So are there we've given you a lot. Yeah, this is just another This is, it's hilarious because we're doing this as a live stream, but this is a conversation we would have.
Yeah.
We would have. So, are there any other questions that you would like us to answer before we say goodnight? I'm glad that the toads have been a little bit more.
I hope you can hear them, Dick, because they're actually
So let us
nice
know
background.
in the comments section if there are any other aspects of this topic or anything related to shoreline that you'd like us to kind of finish up for you, like finish icing the cake on that project. We're going to be we have other plans for the fall that we'll share with you later when we're ready. But we're going to be just trying to catch up on a few things,
including sleep.
Yes, for the rest of the summer. But we'll still do the quilts first, and then we'll have some. We have some
more things
little and big things coming. So, any other questions, or should we say goodnight?
Thank you for joining us as always, and we hope this is interesting to think about.
But provoking.
Yeah. And again, I don't mean to make your photos more precious, but just as you take them, occasionally slow down, think about the image you're taking, think about why you're taking it.
And the thing is, it doesn't, that your memory and what you're trying to convey, you have artistic license here. You don't have to portray, exactly the colors that were there.
Oh,
so.
We're not going away, Deborah.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, no, we're not going away. We are here in town. We just have a lot of projects we're trying to get through and new designs we're working on and all kinds
Always
of things.
Ideas.
So, we're here for the summer, and we will be around. We just don't have, we're not launching a new quilt along tomorrow. Anyway, but yes, Hugh, yes, we'll be here for a while, yes. So we hope you have a before we go, the virtual exhibition, all of them. Can you just kind of
always
give
a plug? So I'm trying to remember right now. I believe that the submissions for the Shoreline virtual exhibition will open on July 15th, and about 2 weeks later we'll open that exhibition. But I'll just make a little plea again. If you have quilt tops or complete quilts that you finished from any of our quilt-alongs, please go up to the quilt-along tab on our website and submit a photo of your work, because I think
we don't have that many from like Sweet Tooth, and I know
there are a ton
hundreds
of people
and
haven't
hundreds.
posted.
Yeah.
So I think there's so much to learn by seeing them all together, and we just really hope you can keep posting.
Yeah, and keep adding
keep
to
uploading.
Yeah, because it is so helpful to other people, and helpful, I would hope, to you to see everybody else's approaches to it.
And it's actually like we learn from it too, because when we start a quilt along, we have an idea. We have a very strong idea of where it's going, but there's sometimes there are surprises of how people interpret things that are really, really useful for us. So,
and I think
and beautiful.
One of the things that's been so great with Shoreline is the vast palettes. I think it's just been the diversity of palettes has been really fantastic.
This is a long goodbye, but
yeah,
when we talk about constraints, one of the things we wanted to do with Shoreline is because there was the gesture of the wave, and that was it.
That was enough for us.
That was enough.
Yeah.
It meant that people would focus on color and proportion. And pretty much that, blocks in our transparency quilts were much more complex. Even in the Lighthouse Inn, there were so many different shapes and decisions. But this, by limiting the design gesture to that simple wave, it opened up a ton of possibilities. And I think that exhibition will be really, really wonderful. So make sure to get those up. I'll make that link live in about 2 weeks, and we'll announce it on social media.
And Debbie Chen checked it. July 15th is the opening.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yes, thank you for checking.
Thank you for checking. My memory on these things is not great.
Yes.
I think originally it was a different date, and then we moved it up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, have a wonderful July. Everyone. Yep. Be safe, and we will see you soon.
Yeah.
But looking forward to continue to share all your quilts. We're dying to see.
Keep them coming.
Yeah, we're dying to see your progress, and let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe this week.
Take care. Bye-bye.